I'm Dwight Cook, 65 years old, born and raised in Idaho in a very, I'll call devout Mormon family. I have three sisters and no brothers. That's how I grew up. The family was very principle driven. Most of the time of my growing up was in a town called Blackfoot, and my dad worked for the government and was a Mormon bishop. And in the Mormon church, most of the bishops are lay, just people from the congregation that the church calls, and that was my dad's calling for 5 years. So it's hard to say when you kind of accept the label of gay. First sexual experiences were in junior high. Nobody really talked about sex. In hindsight, it could have been just teenage or young people experimenting. But once I figured out what the church said about it, I, of course, had a lot of issues with it, a lot of depression, a lot of guilt. Those experiences stopped, but I never stopped thinking about them. And I certainly, recognized that I was attracted to men, but I thought, in many ways, I thought that everybody was attracted to men and that it was just I was weaker or there was something wrong with me where I couldn't stop thinking about it or I couldn't let it go. I dated women because that was what you were supposed to do, and I was going to be the best little boy in the world because I had to make up for this huge secret deficiency inside of me. Yeah, at many points I contemplated and got very close to suicide, and it was not something that I felt like I could talk with my family or anybody. The first time I talked with anybody was when I got to college. It was a Mormon college. This was what was called Rick's then, Rick's College. It's BYU, Idaho now. So I went in and said I had these experiences and I felt really bad about these experiences. They were trying to determine if it was an ongoing orientation, which it certainly was. And so just their questioning told me it was a lot more than experiences that I'd had. And so they basically put me in what today we would call reparative therapy and went through a lot of that. The model everybody was talking about was a distant father and an overprotective mother type of thing. And so in some ways I blamed them, and other ways I was not willing to talk about them and I kind of protected them from it. They knew some. I talked to them once about it before I went on a Mormon missions. And I spent 2 years in Spain, which was a really good experience. I look at it as being a very good experience. But before you went on a Mormon mission, I had to tell people. I had to confess, or at least I felt like that one of the things I had to do was to go apologize and ask for forgiveness from people that I may have hurt. And so I went to a couple of people that I'd had sex with, and I went to my parents. I went to Spain thinking, okay, if I just am righteous and righteous and righteous, and I do the greatest job that anybody could ever do on my mission, that I would be somehow be given this knowledge or this certainty that the Mormon Church was true. Well, and the opposite was true. In that time period, I actually worked for the church for about 3 months in a summer internship program, and that was just before I went on the mission. But through all that, I kind of more and more had more doubts about the church and saw it as being more human, and kept seeing what I felt like were more contradictions. So it was kind of like I said to some people sometimes I went to Spain to convert the Spanish people to um, Mormonism, and I kind of fell in love with them, and I had love with the culture, and I ended up feeling like I was more Spanish than American, and they kind of converted me. That was really eye-opening and wonderful because I began to see how relative things are. I think until you've kind of been immersed in something that's very, very different from how you grew up, you tend to kind of accept many, many things as just fixed or immutable or not a matter of choice. They just are. And when you're exposed to that kind of culture shock or experience where things are so different, then you can begin to realize how relative things are and how much is just tradition or what people are used to, and that there's a lot more choice involved than you might have thought otherwise. So that kind of happened in Spain. When I came back, I got married. I did the good thing in that before I got married, I told my wife about my experiences. At that point in the history of the world, she believed the same model that I did, that this was a one-off experience. It was just, a mistake. And what the church would tell us at that point, hey, once sex is free inside a marriage, then you're not going to have any problem. So got married. We stayed married 12 years. We have two beautiful daughters that we're both very close to and love them dearly. My ex-wife and I were, I think, always struggling to some extent. We certainly had our happy moments, but there was this very, very clear sense from almost the beginning that there was a level of intimacy that was missing. Education was important, and so we supported each other in getting college degrees that we wanted, and mine was in engineering. So, coming back from my mission, this whole idea was beginning to unravel. I had more doubts and more questions than I'd ever had before. Wanted to have a family. I wanted to have kids. It was going to be my dad's only son, and I would be the only person that would carry the Cook name off into the culture and the church, and that was all real important to him. I was the only grandson of my grandfather with a Cook name, so it was like I had this Cook legacy that was important, a Cook Mormon legacy. And so I was really trying hard to stay in the church, but at the same time it was beginning to unravel for me. What we had been promised, that everything would be fine inside the marriage, wasn't happening. And being an engineer and wanting proof and wanting diverse opinions and wanting to see, gather information from as broad a perspective as I can, decided to go to two counselors at the same time, which both of them were like uncomfortable with, but I said, tough, I'm going to do this anyway. So I went to a Mormon counselor and I went to a gay counselor that was totally outside of the church. The Mormon church had a clinic at BYU with equipment that people would go in and strap electrodes to their genitals and sit there, watch pornography, and be instructed to shock themselves whenever they saw a picture of male pornography. And in some cases, they were told to stroke themselves while they were watching female male pornography, and that was something that the church was investing in at the time. I was not quite ready to do that, but I expected that this Mormon counselor was going to promote that, and I expected that the gay counselor was going to tell me, well, your only choice is to get divorced and to go live this, what I considered a wild, have lots of sex but without any relationship type of existence, which is the stereotype of what I'd been taught about the gay community. And the opposite was true. Both counselors gave me lots of options and opened me up to lots of ideas on how Jan and I could stay married. And I think I began to change my mentality where I would focus on the relationship rather than the title of marriage. And then the Mormon counselor was very much in the mindset, this isn't going to change. There's nothing, you're going to be living with this all your life. The only question is, how do you live with it? And the gay counselor was saying, here's all your choices. You got tons of choices. And that was very helpful. And we had two kids. I just absolutely love being a father. It was a joy, and I'm still very close to my daughters. And then eventually Jan and I decided to get divorced. In the process of all that, I had my first sexual experiences with another man as an adult. That kind of changed everything. And instead of going out and hiring two lawyers that would fight each other. We hired one lawyer that was basically a mediator, and we went through together and focused on what was going to be best for the kids. I think both of us would say we were better parents after the divorce because we were much more focused on what's right for the kids, and um, and not so much on how do we make this relationship work. One of the things we did was to look for other people that had been through this, and we got connected with a support group, a secret support group for LGBT Mormons. And we got to know several people in that, one of which was eventually murdered, I think because he was in the closet. We have good friends that died of HIV, some that committed suicide, especially the friend who was murdered. I listened to the eulogies and felt like those people didn't know him like we knew him. We certainly knew a very intimate and significant part of him that they did not. And I concluded at that point that I was going to be out of the closet. If I had 5 people at my funeral, I would want them to celebrate my life knowing it completely and respecting and empathy for the choices that I was offered and that I made. Shortly after the divorce, we had our kids going to support groups for kids of gays and lesbians. And at that time, there was a conference every year, and we would take our kids to that conference. And it was a really good experience for them. They got to learn a lot from their peers, and I got introduced to a television producer that ended up choosing us as one of 5 families to be in a PBS documentary about the kids of gays and lesbians. It's called Our House, and last I checked, it was still available on Amazon. That was 2000. But in the end, that documentary was aired, and it put me out of the closet in a way that you can never go back. At this point, I really start focusing on my career and my kids a lot because I'd spent so much time trying to change myself growing up. And I never did. But through that, I gained a lot of knowledge about how change happens and how people change and what is changeable and what is not changeable. And I was able to extend that understanding into my career. And so that career was like one path. At the same time, in 2000, I met Neil. Jan and I'd been divorced since 92, so there's about 8 years here where I was single and not really finding any body that fit the model of this long-term partner that you're married to. And so I kind of decided that that wasn't for me and that I was just going to have a lot of good, close relationships that I felt really good about and have a large circle. And met Neil. Would have been the equivalent of Grindr, I guess, at that time, America Online chat rooms. You still had phones that would fit in the cradle, and it was very, very slow. But Neil and I met. I'm usually not a very romantic person or a person that is really good at making people feel at ease, or I'm usually pretty results oriented, and let's just get to the chase kind of person. But we were talking and having a great time, and he's so funny and he's so warm, and he accidentally spilt some dessert on his shirt. People have said, oh, this is romantic, but I was just acting from a standpoint of I wanted to get him talking again because I was so enjoying him so much. And he stopped, and it was like this, he was so embarrassed about this little bit of ice cream being on his shirt. And I couldn't figure out what to do to make him feel comfortable again. So just spur of the moment, I took a spoon, got some ice cream, and put it on my shirt. And that kind of did it. I think it was our first date. After a year, we moved in, and it wasn't like we suddenly blended families. He was also married before. He had 2 daughters, just like I did. We moved in together. I sold my house, and together we combined our money and bought another house That's been our journey. He's been with me for 23 years now. In August, it'll be 23 years since our first date. We always felt like we wanted the right to marry, but we really never felt like marriage would define us. So we really weren't planning on getting married. And we go to do our taxes right in the wave of changes around gay marriage. And our accountant came to us and said, look, I just saw some information and did some calculation, and look what you could save if you get married before the end of the year. So we called some friends that flew in that were our witnesses. We had 2 friends that were our witnesses. Neil comes from a Jewish background and found a rabbi/cantor that could come. And we got married in our apartment. It cost us $100 for the marriage license and $30 for the bottle of champagne. We said our vows and had our witness in with about a week and a half preparation. And that was our marriage. Kind of fun. We're getting old together. We're lucky to have each other, and it's been a pretty independent. I've traveled a lot, and we've been able to make that work. There tends to be this idea of you're with somebody or you're alone. Nobody has this perfect relationship with somebody, and you'll go up and down, and you'll have close relationships with other people, and we've been very, very grateful that we've been able to work it out as we have. It's worked well for us, and he's extremely supportive. I hope he feels like I'm supportive of him, and it's been a great journey together.